So how did federal regulators come up with that settlement number for Equifax, and does it really benefit consumers? Joining us to talk about this tonight is Raj Date. He is the former deputy director at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and now he is currently managing director at the venture capital firm Fenway Summer. Nice to have you with us, Raj. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Well, what about this so-called formula that is used to come up with numbers like this, and also the number of consumers involved in this particular case? What did you think of the number that they came up with for Equifax?
Well, it felt a little bit light to me, but it's certainly a complicated process in a negotiated settlement like this. Just to give some context, I mean, what really drives where a settlement like this comes out is, how strong is the government's case in the first place, and how many customers are implicated, and for each one of those customers, how severe is the damage, and finally, how bad is the conduct? And I think in a case like this, it seemed to me that some of the factors went a couple of different ways. Like on the one hand, it was a huge breach, 140 million plus customers affected. And there's no doubt that Equifax did some pretty basic stuff wrong when it comes to data security. But on the other hand, I would be surprised if there are Equifax executives sitting around thinking, you know what, let's put consumer data at risk. That's unlikely. Right. And the fact of the matter is, the sad reality is because there have been so many breaches, take your pick, Target and Saks and even the federal government's own Office of Personnel Management, it's hard to trace any particular fraud back to any particular breach. And that's what makes calculating this stuff kind of hard.
Of the $700 million up to that, $425 million to reparations for consumers, but they have to prove that there was actual financial damage done for them to get the money back. But how do you prove that, and how much do you think anybody should expect to get from this?
It's no picnic to prove these things up, which is why it is, I think, that some of the early coverage talking about how consumers could get up to $20,000 each feels to me a little misleading. I mean, just the math is, if there are 140 million people involved, not all of them are getting $20,000. That would be $2.8 trillion, or 4,000 times as much as the $700 million that we're talking about here. The reality is that consumers will see some benefit, for sure, by virtue of having identity theft monitoring and credit report monitoring. That's worth something. That's something a lot of people should be doing anyway. But I would not get carried away with the sheer magnitude of monetary relief for customers, because it's just math. There's not that much here to go around.
And you mentioned some of the previous breaches as well. Does that not make it even more complicated for consumers to prove the fact that if their data was stolen, it was basically this company's fault, and not, say, the previous hacks at other retailers?
I think it would be really, really hard. And frankly, it was so easy to do, it'd probably be easier for the FTC and the CFPB to do than any individual customer. So that's why I think this notion of proving up individual monetary relief for individual consumers feels like a paperwork burden way too far to really make a big difference.
Raj Date with Fenway Summer, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.